Carey Price raised his glove hand in salute of the hometown fans of Montreal. They were booing him. He was wearing the Montreal sweater. He was the 21-year-old goaltender of the future, a high first-round pick. What happened? Midway through Game 4, he had allowed 4 goals. Worse than that, he had allowed them against the hated Boston Bruins, an unforgivable crime. The Habs were facing elimination. With a goaltending legacy that stretched from Patrick Waugh to George Vezina, the Montreal faithful expected Price to stand on his head. But Price was rarely a stand-on-his-head style of goalie. His game was economical, positional, but at age 21, it just wasn't yet flawless. It would be, but not yet. A year and a half later, more booing. He had allowed 3 goals on 5 shots to start the game. But even though it was the preseason and meant nothing by definition, it was against Boston, and that meant everything in Montreal. They'd give him a Bronx cheer every time he made a save after that. Price thought they should just chill out on the booing. By November 22nd, 2016, the Canadiens were 10 games over 500, and Price hadn't suffered a regulation loss on the season. Their opponent that night, the Ottawa Senators, hadn't scored more than 2 goals against a goalie in a single game in over a month. The Bell Center crowd hadn't witnessed a regulation loss all season. The Habs took a lead in the second. Mike Hoffman scored a one-timer from the face-off circle that beat Price cleanly over the shoulder. The Habs regained the lead. Then Derek Brassard backhanded one in through Price's legs while planted in the crease. The Habs regained the lead again. Moments later, the Senators got Price moving laterally and unable to react in time as Mark Stone beat Price glove side on a bang-bang play. Just minutes after that, Erik Karlsson put a seeing eye floater past Price from distance. The score held up as the game winner. When the final buzzer sounded that night, no one booed Carey Price. The team in front of him gave him 3 different leads to work with, and he couldn't hold on to one of them. And no one booed him. Some of those Senators goals were pretty soft, especially the game winner. But no one in Montreal booed Carey Price. By then, Price was not only a survivor of the notorious Montreal microscope, he was a Vezina and Hart Trophy winner. It had only been about a year since Price had suffered a season-ending knee injury. As a direct result, Montreal fell by 28 points in the standings and missed the playoffs. The fans in Montreal knew what they had in Carey Price. When the public address announcer called last minute in the third period, the noise of the crowd was deafening. The crowd, amped up by the thrill of watching the home team about to celebrate victory and partaking in the celebration. Also by the cathartic release of communal gathering after a year and a half of restrictions. As the final seconds ticked off the clock, the crowd got even noisier. Price watched from the bench, the last place a starting goalie wants to be during a Stanley Cup celebration, because it means your team didn't make it. Once the adrenaline wore off, his knee would be killing him. Confetti streamed from the rafters. Assorted gear was strewn across the ice sheet. Glowing bracelets that were handed out at the front gate rained down from the stands. Price lined up for the ceremonial post-series handshake. Mad respect. Everybody had something to say to him. Something kind or something encouraging. Price had only allowed 1 goal in the game. A redirect from the top of the crease, snuck just past his foot. Nobody could have stopped it. But Price went to the locker room thinking he hadn't done enough. Nobody else thought that. Nobody in Montreal, at least. It was the last time they'd see him for almost a year. For a year and a half, the fans in Montreal hadn't been able to congregate in the Bell Center. All but 3,000 of them missed the Stanley Cup run live. When things finally returned to normal, the team on the ice didn't give them much to cheer about. After their loss in the finals, the Canadiens came back down to earth. Further than that, maybe. The team played on, but not in spirit. Something vital was missing. Not something mechanical, but something human, and everyone in the building felt it. The club's all-time leader in wins and goalie games wasn't there. There was nothing left to give. It had all been drained out on the ice. Price had spent his entire career in Montreal, a career that spanned across parts of 3 decades as a starter, from 2008 to 2022. During that time, they were not a very talented club offensively. Famously, Price only had one teammate in front of him score over 80 points, and that was in his rookie season. Despite that, Price helped elevate the team into the postseason 10 times, playing in 6 All-Star games along the way. And now he played on one knee. 3 times he'd missed almost a full year for injury. And still, he took over the career leaderboard on the more than 100-year-old team. When the public address announcer named him the starting goaltender for Game 75 of the season, the Bell Center exploded into a sustained standing ovation. It had been over 2 years since they saw their starting goalie in person. They chanted his name and cheered him every time he touched the puck. And then, like that, he was gone. Late game, defensive zone, tie score. Best player on the ice? Maybe. But that's not why you're out there. You're out there because the puck has to be won, and someone has to absorb what comes next. For decades, this moment belonged to the specialist, the checking center, the shutdown winger, the face-off guy. Patrice Bergeron made that role redundant by being all those things at once. The world before Bergeron was a much different place. The old NHL was built on division of labor. The New York Islanders built a dynasty on everybody having a specific role. The first line guys were the attackers. The second line was made up of two-way forwards. The third was your checking line. And the fourth was for the pugilists, the grinders, the energy guys. For decades, this was the ideal model upon which all NHL rosters were built. Things started this way because of expansion. When the league doubled in size from one season to the next, the new teams were made up of guys who were buried in the minors because they were good at one thing or another, but couldn't score regularly. The NHL continued to expand, and by the time the WHA started up, the number of big league rosters went from 6 to 26 in a 5-year span. Things continued this way because roster spots were abundant. Teams could afford specialists, players paid to do one thing well and little else. With no salary cap pressure to force efficiency, there was little incentive to consolidate roles. As a young player in Boston, Patrice Bergeron was seen as an offensive center with a high hockey IQ. All on-ice duties were subordinate to scoring. But when he finished his 4th pro season with 70 points and a -28 rating, playing 20 minutes a game, something structural had to change. It wasn't an indictment of Bergeron as a player, but a referendum on how Boston was using him. Coach Dave Lewis was fired following the season. When Claude Julien was brought in to replace Lewis, he challenged Bergeron. He wanted more from him. Not more scoring. Julien's job was to unlock the complete player that he saw in Bergeron. Julien demanded hard work, intensity, and hyper-focus. The reward Julien offered was lower individual totals, but more wins. Bergeron could have pushed back. He could have chased points records. Instead, he went to work. At the same time, the salary cap was still new, and teams were learning how to live within it. The new economic reality leveled the ice surface. Teams that once couldn't afford elite skills suddenly could, but only if they spent efficiently. Roster spots became more valuable. One-dimensional players became harder to justify. When one player can be your go-to scorer, your penalty killer, your face-off man, and your shutdown option, you're paying 1 salary instead of 4. More importantly, you're freeing up roster space for players who can contribute in multiple ways. Over time, that compounds. Bergeron excelled within that environment. He absorbed roles. In the cap era, that quietly changed expectations and made specialists increasingly obsolete. You anticipate the play. You clog the lane. You get there first. You always get there first. Eventually, someone gets there at the same time. The thing that goes along with being everywhere is that sometimes 2 objects try to occupy the same space at the same time. The laws of physics dictate that the object with more momentum will move the object with less. In the case of hockey, the object with less gets knocked to the ice. For Bergeron, the cost of adapting to Julien's demands wasn't statistical, it was physical. Playing all over the ice in multiple roles meant traffic, collisions, and exposure to new kinds of dangers. 10 games into the Julien regime, Bergeron took a hit from behind which drove him face first into the boards. The play cost him the rest of the season. Early the following year, he took another bad hit and suffered another concussion. Another followed. You might ask yourself, at what point does hyper-focus become tunnel vision? Bergeron's style was hyper-aware, detail-oriented, position-based, and anticipatory. Those traits reduce risk most of the time. But they also put you in traffic, in lanes, in front of plays as they develop. Bergeron wasn't standing exactly in the kinds of places where collisions occur because of recklessness. It was his job to be where the action was, to anticipate where the play would go. That's exposure. Bergeron never played recklessly, but he did play everywhere. The spaces he occupied, between the puck and the net, between breakout lanes, between passing options, were often the most dangerous parts of the ice. His game depended on arriving first, not arriving hard. When it worked, it looked effortless. When it didn't, it looked unforgiving. As Bergeron's game became more demanding defensively, questions lingered quietly in the background. He had already lost the season to concussion. Some fans considered it to be the cost of playing the game the right way. Each hard matchup carried risk. There was no guarantee that the version of Bergeron Claude Julien was shaping would be durable or even sustainable. The Bruins pushed forward anyway. So did Bergeron. Bergeron did adjust his game, not by playing more cautiously, but by speed reading the ice. He didn't shy away from contact after his injuries, but refined his positioning, anticipation, and timing to win battles by ending plays before they developed. Why did Patrice Bergeron so often take the final face-off of a season in the highest stakes moments? The answer was reliability. Game 7, Toronto, 2013. The Bruins trail by 2 with less than 3 minutes remaining. Bergeron assists on the third goal, scores the tying goal, then ends the series in overtime. Game 7, Vancouver, 2011. Bergeron scores twice, including the cup-clinching goal. He finishes +4 on the night. His assignment, the Sedins, finish a combined -8. These aren't the heroics of someone who found themselves in the zone. They were consistent, predictable outcomes, the inevitable result of preparation meeting opportunity. When they played on the same line together as youngsters for Team Canada, Bergeron outscored Sidney Crosby. Now they were men, established. After years of accepting a diminished offensive role, it would have been easy to reunite with Crosby and light it up again, but that wasn't the assignment. The assignment was, ironically, to play the very role he would soon help make obsolete. The specialist, the face-off man, the role player. Bergeron accepted it. Canada won Olympic gold. By the time he decided to walk away from playing, Bergeron had become the model player for the modern NHL. A Swiss Army knife, a specialist and star rolled into one. His late career offensive revival on Boston's perfection line proved that the scoring had always been there. He simply chose not to build his career around it. Instead, he took the hardest matchups every night. He still scored, still occasionally led the team in scoring, but he also won a record 6 Selke trophies. In time, the Selke trophies will be all that's remembered about him, but there is a real story. Before Bergeron, those trophies belonged to the specialist, the defensive shadow, the grinder. After Bergeron, two-way forward was no longer a specialty, but an expectation. It's now the minimum requirement to keep an NHL roster spot. In the summer of 1968, 18-year-old Bobby Clarke visited the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. 3 years earlier, he'd been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. At that point, he was a skinny, buck-toothed kid with glasses. He wasn't a great skater, wasn't physically gifted or particularly skilled. What distinguished him from his peers was his work ethic. On pure will and determination, Clarke became a hockey prodigy, a relentless worker who scored nearly 3 points a game in his first year of Major Junior. He had already quit school to focus on the sport full-time, but there was no guarantee that his body would hold up to the rigors of a pro career. The Mayo Clinic visit would decide his fate. Clarke played for the Flin Flon Bombers in the newly formed Western Canadian Junior Hockey League. The year earlier, they'd been league champions of the Junior B Manitoba Junior Hockey League. Clarke scored 183 points, and the Bombers finished with a 42-6 record. Flin Flon was the most remote location in the Western Junior circuit. Adding to the shock of long travel, when visitors got there, they were greeted by the most violent team in hockey. Bobby Clarke was their leader. When asked where Flin Flon was, Clarke's future Flyers teammate Oris Kindrachuk quipped that Flin Flon is 5 miles north of where civilization ends, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little. That first year in 1968, Clarke formed a dynamic duo with winger Reggie Leach. Clarke led the league with 168 points, and Leach potted 87 goals as the Bombers dominated the regular season. In the playoffs, however, the Bombers fell to the Estevan Bruins in the President's Cup Finals. That summer, he made his fateful trip to the Mayo Clinic. When doctors ran him through a battery of tests, he was cleared to play and pursue a professional career in hockey. He had 1 year left of juniors before he would be eligible for the draft. Leach was lost to injury for most of the season. The loss of his running mate hurt Clarke's overall points production, but he still settled up with 51 goals on the year, same as the year before. The Bombers won the President's Cup as league champs that year, but were unable to compete for the Memorial Cup for overall national supremacy. The Canadian Amateur Hockey Association had barred WCJHL clubs from participating in the tournament. The Bombers staged an unsanctioned 7-game national title series with the St. Thomas Barons of the Western Ontario Junior A League, but the Barons withdrew after 3 games because the Bombers were too violent. By the end of it, Clarke was eligible for the NHL amateur draft. He was considered one of the top prospects in junior hockey. Some scouts had him ranked number 1 overall. Patty Gunnell sent Clarke's Mayo Clinic results to every NHL club, but skepticism prevailed. Despite all the violence and record-shattering points production, Clarke lived a normal life, but lived a daily routine that few in hockey understood. Every aspect of his life was strictly regulated. Every morning, he would take an insulin injection in his arm. He had to observe a special diet which limited consumption and eliminated rich desserts altogether. Facial cuts were also a real hazard, especially in the violent climate his team cultivated. An infection from a simple cut, from a punch or high stick, could lead to death. The professional hockey ranks had never held a diabetic among its number. There were very few diabetic athletes in pro sports in general. Baseball legend Jackie Robinson was a notable exception, though he'd kept his condition a secret during his playing days. Notre Dame quarterback Coley O'Brien and tennis star Bill Talbert were also diabetic. But at the NHL draft in 1969, Clarke was considered an unknown quantity at best, and a terrible risk at worst. By the end of the first round of selections, arguably the best available prospect was still just sitting there. Philadelphia Flyers scouts Tiny Thompson and Jerry Melnick vouched strongly for Clarke. Thompson said, "If Clarke doesn't make it, I'll resign as a scout." By the time Philadelphia picked again in the second round, 11 NHL teams had passed on him, including the Flyers. The Bruins had passed on him 3 times. With Philadelphia on the clock and Clarke still on the board, Melnick nearly had a fit. He pleaded with his bosses, "You've got to take him now. You've got to." They did, and the Flyers took the best player in the draft with the 17th pick. At the 1969 Flyers training camp, coach Vic Stasiuk's first impression was horrible. I watched him skate and I said, "Uh-oh." But as soon as I dropped the puck for a scrimmage, I knew I had something. However, Clarke's condition proved to cause extra complications. Twice during training camp, he skipped breakfast for an early morning workout, then passed out after his daily injection. That's when Flyers trainer Frank Lewis approached him. "You and I have got to work closely together as long as you play hockey on this club." Lewis started giving him a Coke with 2 or 3 tablespoons of sugar in it before games. Between periods, Lewis would give him a half glass of sweetened orange juice, then a full glass after the game. With Clarke on the team, Lewis's training kit consisted of bandages, tape, scissors, gloves, and a couple of chocolate bars, just in case. Clarke didn't like to talk about his diabetes with reporters. It's not that he was ashamed of having it, but he didn't like people to make a big deal of it. If he ended up not making it, he didn't want people to think that his condition was the reason. By the end of training camp, Clarke was a regular in the top 6 and power play units, but his tenacious defensive work also kept him on the penalty kill. In his rookie year, he played every game and was given 4 team awards voted on by the Flyers fan club. Everything seemed to be going well until training camp 1971. Clarke reported to camp at 167 pounds, 14 under his playing weight. His wisdom teeth were abscessed and badly infected. The Flyers sent him for dental surgery. By the end of it, he'd lost another half dozen or more pounds and he faced an uphill battle. The year before, as a sophomore, Clarke had broken the team record with 63 points. By the time the new season was a month old, he was a major disappointment. After 31 games, he had just 5 goals and 16 points. The club limped to a 10-16-5 record in that stretch. They'd been held to 2 goals or less 19 times, including being shut out 5 times. The next game would be on Christmas Day, but the NHL had scheduled a lump of coal for the Flyers. They would be in Boston, where they hadn't won since 1967. Clarke was up for it. He gave his team a 1-0 lead on an unassisted effort in the first, before the team cratered in the second. But it seemed to spark something in him. The timing was right. The very next day, the Flyers hosted the Penguins. The Flyers had waited 2.5 months for another meeting. On opening night, Flyers rookie and first-round pick Pierre Plante made contact with Penguins goalie Les Binkley in the crease on Clarke's game-tying goal. Penguins defender Brian Watson jumped off the bench and led a 3-man posse over to the celebrating Flyers. He cross-checked Plante in the face, knocking him out of his first NHL game. In the rematch, the Flyers didn't get their revenge with a physical beatdown, but with a barrage of pucks. And even that almost didn't happen. Flyers' top right wing Serge Bernier had suffered through a tough stretch. His line with center Jimmy Johnson and Gary Dornhofer had lost their spark. Rookie head coach Fred Shiro was unhappy. The Spectrum crowd had even taken to booing Bernier. Shiro was going to scratch him, but changed his mind 15 minutes before game time. Instead, he put him on Clarke's checking line with hound dog Bob Kelly. The combo immediately proved effective. They hounded the Pens' top line, hurrying and harassing the puck from them, and counterattacked with surprising ease. Bernier picked up 5 points for a new single-game club record. Clarke nabbed 4 in the 6-1 triumph. Bernier received a standing ovation for his efforts. The warm feelings didn't last long. The Flyers won only 2 of the next 13 on the schedule. Bernier scored in only 4 of those games. In late January, Bernier and Johnson were traded to bring in Bill Flett and Ross Lonsberry from Los Angeles. But Clarke remained dominant. Now the undisputed number 1 center of the Philadelphia Flyers, Clarke finished the year collecting 28 goals and 60 points in the final 45 games. At the season's conclusion, he had played all 78 games and finished with 81 points. That summer, he was recognized with the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy for perseverance and dedication to hockey. Before he was firmly established, he was leery of talking to the media about his diabetes. That summer, he became general campaign chairman for the Delaware Valley Diabetes Association. That's when he knew he had arrived. At age 10, Jean Ratelle was enrolled in Roussin Academy in Montreal. There, he formed a dynamic duo with winger Rod Gilbert. For 5 years, they rarely lost a game together. Then, at age 16, Gilbert left for Guelph, Ontario to play with the Rangers' junior team, the Biltmores. Ratelle was left behind. In Guelph, Gilbert would take every opportunity to tell coach Eddie Bush about his buddy over at Roussin. Day after day, he would pester Bush to bring Ratelle onto the team, praising his skill, claiming that Ratelle was an even better hockey player than he was. Bush agreed to give him a look. Gilbert wasn't wrong. Ratelle made an immediate impact, helping the team improve by 28 points in the standings, jumping from last place to third. Over the following 2 years, he scored 187 points in 95 games in Guelph. In 1961, he made his NHL debut, scoring 2 goals and 3 points in 3 games with the Rangers. Just 3 years earlier, nobody even knew his name. Ratelle was a big guy, but he never threw his weight around. In a career that spanned over 20 years, he never got into a single fight. He never even swore. Perhaps it was his mild manners that kept him off the radar. Over the next couple seasons, after graduating from juniors, Ratelle bounced up and down between Manhattan and Baltimore, the Rangers' primary farm team. The Rangers insisted that Gilbert and Ratelle were the future. But in his first lengthy call-up, Ratelle notched 4 goals and 12 points in 31 games and was labeled a bust. They said he wasn't aggressive enough, didn't dig the puck out of the corners, or fly around at top speed the way Gilbert did. He didn't hit back. There were those who thought he just didn't measure up to the big league standard of play. Sometime during the 1963-64 season, he suffered a back injury. It seemed like a small thing at the time. He didn't miss any games, and it wasn't even reported on in the press. But in late 1966, X-rays revealed that he'd been playing with a broken back. His career, and likely even his prospects of living a comfortable life, were in the hands of the Rangers' husky, cigar-chomping team doctor, Kazuo Yanagisawa. He was the only one allowed to smoke in the Rangers' dressing room. He would approach an injured player and tell him, "I know it hurts, but you're not playing any sissy sport." Often, he'd get players to punch him in the stomach as hard as they could. Yanagisawa had performed a career-saving spinal fusion surgery 2 months earlier on Gilbert. When he returned to action, Gilbert was a new man. Ratelle became one of 5 Rangers to undergo the surgery, as well as Eric Nestorenko of the Blackhawks and Phil Jackson of the Knicks. All returned to action. Ratelle's return, however, was complicated. After holding out for a better contract, he started the 1965 season with the Clippers. But when he scored 9 goals in 8 games, it was obvious he'd outgrown the minors. He was never sent back down again. By the end of the 1966 season, Ratelle had worked his way up to number 1 center. That's when the X-ray took place. Ratelle was out of action for the first 2 months of the 67 season, recovering. When he returned to the lineup, he clearly wasn't himself. He scored 6 goals and 11 points in a limited role in 41 games. Before the following season, Gilbert once again lobbied for his good buddy Ratelle. Rangers coach Emile Francis put the two of them together on a line with rugged left winger Vic Hadfield, and they formed a perfect trio. They came to be known as the goal-a-game or gag line. Hadfield could work the corners or take hacks in the slot. Gilbert would find the soft spots, and Ratelle would distribute. What made them particularly effective was their ability to find each other blind through traffic. They became one of the most consistent scoring threats in the league. Year after year, they would produce just as their name implied. Coach Francis claimed Ratelle never had a bad practice, let alone a bad game. He was a stickler for habits. He stuck with a flat blade well after the trend for curving sticks had taken off. It gave him a deadly backhand. Off the ice, he played the stock market, smart and steady, like his on-ice game. Never speculating, making good investments, and parking excess capital in saving bonds to check inflation. He hated to travel because it took time away from watching his children grow. Therefore, he put a special emphasis on performing well in road games so that the trip wouldn't be a total waste. He refused to eat pork the night before a game, and if you were with him, you couldn't have more than 3 beers either. He was strict about not having sex before a game, and made Gilbert follow his example. Ratelle said, "Well, if I don't, you don't." Gilbert replied, "How the hell does that apply to me?" One night, Gilbert stayed out late with friends. During the next game in Chicago, Gilbert threw the puck in the corner for Ratelle, but he refused to retrieve it. Back on the bench, Gilbert asked, "What's the matter with you?" Ratelle replied, "You showed me little respect. You don't want to play." "What do you mean I don't want to play? I'm playing. Let's go." No, Ratelle said. "God only helps those who help themselves." Game day meals would be early, 6 hours before puck drop. Then he would get to the rink to concentrate on the game and to prepare sticks. By 1971, Ratelle enjoyed his 4th straight 70-plus point season and was recognized with the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy for dedication to hockey and perseverance. Modest and polite, almost to a fault, he epitomized the classy center. Ratelle commanded so much respect around the league for his ability and style of play that he never had to take the kinds of abuse usually doled out for top-line players. He let his playmaking do his fighting for him. He said, "If I'd been the kind of guy to fight and play rough, I don't think I would have achieved what I have achieved." New York Post columnist Larry Merchant once said that Jean Ratelle is the kind of hockey player all the ruffians would be if they had his ability. Before we move on, if you enjoy these quiet late-night hockey stories, consider subscribing to Cold Case Hockey for many more to come. And if you'd like to support the channel further, memberships are now live. Thanks for listening, and now, back to the video. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The NHL was facing a crisis. Clutching, grabbing, hooking, and obstruction had slowed the game to a grinding halt, rendering it virtually unwatchable to casual fans. Then, in its darkest hour, league officials stepped in to crack down on rough play to go along with significant rule changes in an effort to open up the game and make it accessible again. The year is 1930. It's the height of the Great Depression, and it's up to an on-ice official to save the game. At the time, the NHL was not yet the institution that it is today. This was near the beginning of what hockey historians refer to as the establishment years. The league was less than 15 years old. Possession of the Stanley Cup trophy could still be challenged by outsiders. Waning interest in the sport had recently caused the collapse of 2 different major hockey leagues on the West Coast. This helped open up the NHL into America, but America had its own problems at the time. Economic instability was being felt in every sector of society, and hockey was not exempt from its effects. The survival of the NHL was not assured. Essentially, every entertainment dollar was hard-earned in a society where money and work were scarce. Hockey's rules didn't allow for forward passes in the attacking zone. This allowed for a trap-style defensive system where defenders would stand attackers up at the blue line by obstruction, holding, and merciless cross-checking. Eventually, an offensive player would break through to create a rush play that would usually result in a save and a whistle. In short, NHL games were boring and low-event affairs. The season before, Montreal Canadiens goalie George Hainsworth had 22 shutouts in 44 games, and 6 of those ended in ties. For the 1929-30 season, the NHL instituted a new rule that would make the game more exciting. It would allow the forward pass in all 3 zones. This innovation changed the style of play from a stick-handling game to a passing game. This meant that teams had to now play as a unit instead of as a collection of solo puck carriers. The immediate results were readily apparent. The average NHL game featured 3 more goals than the previous season. But this is only one part of the story. As seen in later decades, the forward pass doesn't guarantee it will defeat a trap-style system. That would require rule enforcement meant to speed up play and free up offense. The way Eddie Shore tells it, there was one man brave enough to dictate play and forcibly change the tactics of the average defender, and he wasn't a coach. Holding court in an all-night Montreal diner, Eddie Shore told the forgotten story of the crackdown that saved the game. In 1953, Shore was owner, coach, and general manager of the Springfield Indians. He was there at the Chicken Coop for a meeting with Quebec League officials. There, he lamented the state of the game, waxing poetic about the beauty of his beloved sport, the speed and skill which was snuffed out by the violent efforts of barbarian defenders. His thesis was simple: eliminate hooking, holding, and cross-checking from the game, and the game itself would become more exciting again. One of his listeners objected, wondering how such a thing could actually be pulled off. Shore then gave the group a history lesson. Frank Calder, who was NHL president at the time, enlisted veteran referee Mickey Ion to do just that: eliminate obstruction and call the game by the book. Ion called everything. Shore was involved in one contest where 24 minor penalties were called, including 6 on Shore himself. Everybody thought Ion was crazy. The number of goals increased. The way Shore has it, the people started flocking back into the buildings. His listeners leaned in. On the ice, Ion was the right man to perform triage. The rules against obstruction already existed, but Shore credits Ion with the will to enforce them. The man-advantage heavy play allowed a real-time pressure test for the new pass-first offensive systems to establish and thrive. Scoring chances increased. Game flow improved tremendously. Whenever he had to train a new referee, Ion would have them remember a simple saying: "From now until the end of the game, you and I are the only sane men in the building." Ion would call so many penalties in that era that opposing players would have to share the penalty box, crowding as many as 7 together at a time. In one incident, a bench-clearing brawl between the Maple Leafs and New York Americans delayed gameplay by 15 minutes and required police assistance to break up. Ion's solution was to call the 2 opposing players who started it for 20-minute penalties each, ensuring the period could end without further retaliation. Sometimes he'd even call phantom penalties just to assert his authority. When Toe Blake was a young player for the Maroons, Ion called him for a minor penalty. As he was skating to the penalty box, Blake told Ion he couldn't say what was on his mind because he'd raised the penalty. Ion's hand immediately went back up, as he changed the penalty to a major. "Nobody's going to think obscenities like that about me," Ion said. Shore waved his hand dismissively. "Yeah, but in a couple years, the game slipped back into the old groove," he said. Clutching and grabbing once again dictated play. Referees quietly slipped back into game management. But by then, the danger had passed. Fans had returned. The buildings were fuller. Hockey had proven it could still command scarce entertainment dollars in a world where money, jobs, and even leagues themselves were disappearing. Not every club survived that era. Teams failed in Ottawa, New York, Montreal, and elsewhere, but the NHL did. And once survival was assured, urgency gave way to comfort. Mickey Ion didn't change hockey forever. He didn't invent new rules, and he didn't redesign the sport. What he did was prove something: that the game could move faster, that skill could breathe, that passing could replace individual rushes, and that fans would respond when the ice opened up. His enforcement created a brief but decisive pressure test, one that showed what hockey could be when the rule book was treated as law instead of suggestion. When that proof was no longer needed, Ion faded back into the machinery. Eventually, he gained a reputation as a referee who let too much go. The same man who once called everything was now blamed for calling too little. But the important work had already been done. Hockey had crossed a threshold. It had survived its most fragile years and earned its place in the entertainment economy. The modern game, faster, more interconnected, built on movement rather than attrition, traces part of its lineage back to a moment when the outcome was not guaranteed. That's the part worth remembering. Not that the NHL survived, but that it very nearly didn't, and that, for a time, one official was willing to stand alone on the ice and insist that the game live up to what it promised to be. In January 1959, Detroit Red Wings Norris Trophy-winning defenseman Red Kelly suffered a broken ankle. It happened during practice and was never disclosed to the public. Kelly missed the next 3 games and wore a plaster cast on his ankle. Detroit lost all 3 without him and plummeted in the standings. The Red Wings hadn't missed the playoffs in 20 years, and pressure quickly mounted. Wings GM Jack Adams asked Kelly to remove the cast and return to the lineup. Kelly agreed. He removed the cast and played with his leg taped from instep to knee, restricting his movement. Detroit won 3 of the next 4 games. Kelly finished the year in the Red Wings lineup despite the injury. According to a later report, Kelly could stand little pressure on his ankle and could put no power into his skating stride, thus limiting his effectiveness. His production declined, and some began to whisper that 31-year-old Kelly was washed. Forwards beat him to loose pucks consistently. Unable to push off with his injured leg, Kelly was ineffective along the boards and was forced to hook and hold his way out of trouble. For a 3-time Lady Byng Trophy recipient, finishing the season with 17 minors was in itself a sign of decline. Publicly, Team Brass criticized the club and the media. At one point, Coach Sid Abel fined all the veterans $100 for lack of effort, Kelly included. No one outside the organization knew about the injury. The team kept it quiet out of concern that opponents would target the ankle. Kelly finished the season with a disappointing 21 points in 67 games, a significant drop-off from his usual standard. The Red Wings also missed the playoffs. Kelly was criticized for poor play. Some said he'd lost his stuff. When confronted with questions about his performance, Adams threw him under the bus. During an interview for Maclean's magazine the following season, reporter Trent Frayne asked Red Kelly about the club's recent improved performance. Kelly offered platitudes. Frayne pushed. He told Kelly that reports out of Detroit suggested his legs were gone. Kelly pushed back. He revealed the truth about the injury. Frayne published the account, touching off a small, unintended scandal. When questioned about players being asked to play through injuries, Jack Adams denied the severity of Kelly's ailment, pointing to assessments from team doctors that characterized it as a bone bruise. Red Wings management felt that Kelly's comments about the injury had been framed in a way that reflected poorly on the organization. Kelly, for his part, believed the tone of the article had been shaped to sell magazines. Management's interpretation prevailed. Kelly was summoned to Adams' office. Bruce Norris, the president and owner of the Red Wings, was in the room. Adams told Kelly that he had been traded to the New York Rangers and was expected to report to the team the next day. Kelly told him he'd think about it and left the room. By 1960, the Rangers had earned a reputation as an organization that didn't treat its players well or pay them fairly. Kelly may have heard stories from teammate Gordie Howe about his own experiences attending Rangers camp. The club had shown recent signs of life in the standings, but they were currently entrenched at the bottom. and Red Kelly probably wasn't going to be able to dig them out. The trade was supposed to be Kelly and winger Billy McNeil for Eddie Shack and Bill Gadsby. Kelly stayed up all night and thought about it. The next morning, he called Rangers GM Muzz Patrick and told him he was retiring and that he would not report. There was silence on the other end of the line. Kelly explained to Patrick that he had recently married and was starting a family. His wife was pregnant and she wasn't keen to go. Kelly would go into business, look after his bowling alley in Simcoe. He'd already been on the phone with his other employer, for whom he sold power tools during the off-season to fish around for work. Patrick didn't understand. He told Kelly that the trade had already been made, that he was to report immediately. Kelly apologized and told Patrick it was nothing personal against New York, but he didn't like the way things had been handled from Detroit's end, that he thought he deserved a better fate than to be dumped off to a last-place team. Later that day, Billy McNeil also called Patrick to tell him he wasn't going to report either. Patrick hung up the phone. Both Kelly and McNeil were suspended by the Red Wings. Adams said they were finished around Detroit. League President Clarence Campbell stepped in to have a personal word with Kelly. He wouldn't be swayed. Campbell had no choice but to void the trade. League Brain Trust lamented the decision. Muzz Patrick prophesied a dark day when players would begin to dictate where they played. Kelly got home the next day to news that Toronto assistant GM King Clancy had called. He wanted to know if Kelly was interested in joining the Maple Leafs. The Leafs hadn't won a Stanley Cup in nearly a decade. They had a coach known to be hard on his players. But Toronto was closer to home and wouldn't require Kelly's wife to move. And if it kept him playing hockey a little while longer, then sure. Toronto agreed to send bottom-pairing defenseman Mark Rayom to Detroit. Adams was put in a bad spot. He could let Kelly retire and receive nothing, or accept what Toronto was willing to offer. Adams accepted. Campbell approved the deal. The Brain Trust lamented. Adams was in the press, still smarting, insisting something had to be done to prevent a repeat. Some saw Kelly's move as a loophole. What made it work was that he was genuinely willing to retire. Punch Imlich took Kelly, a declining offensive defenseman, and had him center a line with Frank Mahovlich. The move revived Kelly's career, unlocked Big M, and became a major catalyst for 3 straight Stanley Cups from 62 to 64, then one more for good measure in 67. Imlich is often credited with genius for the move, but it's something that Detroit would do occasionally. Imlich just made the Kelly switch from D to center permanent. Kelly was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1969. Imlich was inducted in 1984.
Scott Niedermayer spent the long, quiet summer of 2005 at his lake home in the Kootenays. He'd spent the summer relaxing, exercising, being a dad, and contemplating his future. He'd had tremendous success in 13 seasons with the New Jersey Devils, including 3 Stanley Cups and 2 All-Star teams. Most observers agreed that he probably would have enjoyed better personal numbers if he hadn't spent all those years in the cult-like hockey environment of New Jersey. But success followed Niedermayer like a lost puppy dog. Personal glory was never the story. Niedermayer was the only player in hockey to have won Stanley Cup, Memorial Cup, World Cup, Olympic gold, and gold medals in both senior and junior world championships. After weighing the pros and cons of entering free agency, he decided to test the market. It was uncharted territory, but there were early indications that things would get to this point. Niedermayer had held out during training camp 2000 and rejected a long-term deal with the Devils back in 2003. He had asked for $9 million a year for 5 years. Arbitration awarded him a $7 million deal for 1 year. That year, he won the Norris Trophy as the NHL's top defenseman. After the lockout, the salary cap included a cap on individual salaries of $7.8 million per season. That means many teams would be able to afford his services and offer him the maximum dollar amount. It also reduced curiosity and anxiety based around what the final dollar amount might be. With that in mind, Niedermayer kept the door open with the Devils, but would be able to make a decision of where to play not based entirely on money, but on preference. Niedermayer himself said during an interview on a radio station in Vancouver that he would prefer to play in the West, as both he and his wife are from there. But, he said, there are other considerations we're going to have to take into account. There was a short list of teams considered to be in the Niedermayer sweepstakes. Calgary, Vancouver, Colorado, Phoenix, and Anaheim were considered the front-runners. On the first day of free agency, Niedermayer's agent Kevin Epp fielded calls from 14 suitors. The Flyers, Maple Leafs, and Canucks were among the most serious. One of those suitors was Lou Lamoriello and the Devils. Lamoriello offered Niedermayer the maximum salary of $7.8 million for 5 years. In some ways, it was an apology for the tense previous 2 contract negotiations. Niedermayer turned it down. It was a difficult decision. Though he did feel loyalty to the franchise, a few experiences put things into perspective for him. One was the 2003 Stanley Cup Final. The Devils had won 2 championships. The Anaheim Mighty Ducks were surprise contestants. Fueled by timely scoring, great team defense, and an unbeatable goalie on the heater of a lifetime, the Mighty Ducks survived the Western Conference playoff race. Part of the timely scoring and team defense mix was provided by checking center Rob Niedermayer, younger brother of Scott. Rob had been a 5th overall pick of the Florida Panthers in 1993, that club's first ever draft choice, and he enjoyed a similar Cinderella run with them in 1996 that ended in disappointment. After 9 seasons as a pro, he'd yet to enjoy a Stanley Cup victory. When media asked Rob and Scott's mother Carol during the final who she was rooting for, she said she was hoping Rob could have a turn. The fans and media in New Jersey had a field day with the quote, using it as blackboard material. After the Devils won Game 7, the 2 brothers met in the handshake line. Scott told Rob, "You played like a champion," but it was little consolation. The thrill of winning a 3rd Stanley Cup that year was tempered by the thought that he had stood in the way of his younger brother's dream. The thought stuck with him. The other moment happened during the lockout. The Niedermayer brothers were able to play together for the first time while representing Canada at the World Championships in Prague. They roomed together. Carol even paid a visit. On the ice, things felt comfortable and simplified, like pond hockey. Canada won gold. The Niedermayers had a great time. This was arguably the moment that Scott figured out what his plan would be, though he still spent the summer dwelling on it. Disney had recently sold the Ducks to Henry and Susan Samueli. The deal had been completed just before the summer. The Samuelis brought in Brian Burke to be the new GM. Burke read the tea leaves. Niedermayer was one of the top defensemen in the league, and he was set to become an unrestricted free agent. Rob was also a free agent that summer, but he was restricted. Since the team already had him on the roster, it might pay off to make Rob happy. Burke visited Rob at his farm and made his pitch. He had a vision of how he wanted to build the team, but it involved signing his brother. He asked Rob what he wanted for the team. Rob said, "We've got to be tougher." Burke went out and acquired Travis Moen, Todd Fedoruk, and Kip Brennan, came back and said, "Is that enough?" Rob was satisfied. He agreed to a 4-year extension worth $8 million. The free agency window had opened on a Monday. Scott took a few days to listen to offers from Calgary, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Vancouver, among others. For Scott, it came down to a choice between returning to New Jersey or joining one of 2 other teams, San Jose or Anaheim. Whatever team made the better pitch and had the better vision for the roster going forward is where he would sign. The Devils had the best offer on the table, but Niedermayer wasn't sold on their ability to go on another run. They also didn't have Rob in the lineup. On Wednesday night, he called Lamoriello and told him his decision. It was a tough conversation. Lamoriello went quiet afterward, but ultimately respected it. On Thursday, Niedermayer signed his deal. He agreed to terms with the Anaheim Mighty Ducks on a 4-year deal worth $6.75 million per season. Burke knew he'd just signed the most coveted free agent of the offseason. He said they had something to offer that other teams didn't. His brother. Then he said, "I can say to Mr. and Mrs. Niedermayer, you no longer have to pick a team when you're cheering for your sons." Before his arrival, the Ducks had made the playoffs 3 times in 11 years of their existence. On their cup run in 2003, they were underdogs in every series. Niedermayer provided an element to the team that they'd never had. He was a proven and consistent winner. He had the ability to turn a game on willpower alone. Just his presence in the locker room made a massive impact. Rookies Corey Perry and Ryan Getzlaf looked up to him. He didn't say much, but when he did speak, everybody paid attention. He was named captain. When the puck dropped in the 2005-06 season, the Mighty Ducks weren't considered legitimate contenders. But they made the playoffs, upset the Flames in the first round, then knocked out the Avalanche in the second. Sometimes it takes a guy like Niedermayer to show everybody else how to refuse to lose. The following season, Burke was able to trade spare parts and draft picks for Chris Pronger. There were arguably 10 legitimate Norris Trophy caliber defensemen in the league that year. Franchise-altering defensemen who were in their prime. Now, Anaheim had 2 of them. By the time the 4-year deal expired, the Ducks had dropped the word mighty from their name, changed their color scheme from eggplant and jade to black and gold, and the Niedermayer brothers had won a Stanley Cup together in 2007. Scott won the Conn Smythe Trophy. No other free agent signing has ever produced a Conn Smythe result within 2 years. On a side note, the only other free agent signing to win the trophy was Scott Stevens. Something to think about during the signing season. It was arguably the greatest free agent signing in the history of the sport, but it probably wouldn't have gotten done if it hadn't been for the presence of Rob. Rob had been acquired in a deadline deal in 2003. The Mighty Ducks were making a playoff push and needed to beef up their bottom 6 and add grit to the lineup. A decision that felt convenient in the moment ended up being the most consequential one the club ever made. When the WHA merged with the NHL in 1979, 2 WHA clubs were left out of the deal. One of them was the Birmingham Bulls. Bulls executive Gilles Leger wasn't out of a job for long. He was hired by the Quebec Nordiques, one of the merging clubs, to serve as Director of Player Development. It was an inspired choice. The Nordiques wanted to build a team that could challenge their cross-provincial rivals, the Montreal Canadiens, for talent. But outside the draft, their prospects of being able to do so were thin. Leger had a knack for attracting great, even Hall of Fame talents in a saturated market, and didn't let any obstacle, legal or otherwise, stand in his way. 5 years earlier, Leger had orchestrated the first, and to date most successful defection of a communist-trained player. And not just any player. Václav Nedomansky was a star for the Czechoslovakia national team. The particulars of how Leger brought Nedomansky over to North America were treated like state secrets, because they essentially were. Like a hockey Woodward and Bernstein, rumors hinted at payoffs, midnight meetings in the dark, wiretaps, and a shadowy broker known only as 007. The Great Escape took place in Switzerland, while Big Ned was on a scheduled vacation, with no one from the party watching over his shoulder. The next potential defector would face a tougher road. Leger had identified his next communist target by as early as November 1976. By the time he ganged up with the Nordiques, he'd had over 2.5 years to plan the hockey heist of the century. At the 1980 Olympic Games at Lake Placid, Nordiques brass couldn't get within 100 feet of the Stastnys.
Leger had begun his cloak and dagger operation in earnest after being hired by the Nordiques. Internally, it was called the European Project. He kicked tires on the Stastnys at every international tournament. Czech authorities were aware of him, and weary, but they didn't know about Agent 007. 3 of the 4 Stastny brothers were participating for Team Czechoslovakia: Marian, Peter, and Anton. Peter in particular was a special talent. He'd been earmarked as a future world-class superstar since his coming-out party as a 19-year-old at the 1976 World Championships. The brothers insisted that Marian was the best of them. He was the one they'd have to leave behind. The trio scored 16 goals and 33 points in 6 games during the Olympics. Czechoslovak athletes at the Olympics were under heavy guard. Leger managed to send an intermediary through to dangle the prospect of freedom to the Stastnys. The Stastny brothers had never agreed with the regime. The 2 eldest brothers, Vladimir and Marian, had actually risked their lives to protest in 1968, while tanks still rolled through the streets. Young Peter told his father that he'd be out there too if given the chance. He dreamed of living and playing abroad. While traveling with the national team, he would sneak issues of the hockey news back home. He even patterned his game on a rougher, more NHL-ready style. But the prospect of leaving wasn't as simple as it sounded. Even if one managed to evade watchful authorities, there was a real cost of escape back home for those left behind. Family would be punished in their place. Because of this real associated cost, none of the brothers were ready to just drop everything and go. At least, not yet. Peter's wife, Darina, was pregnant. He hated the thought of his child being brought up in a system ran by the communists. The thought that the family values and ideas he would teach the child would be warped and undermined by the government was sickening. The call came from a post office payphone in Innsbruck, Austria. The 2 youngest brothers, Peter and Anton, were on vacation there. They were interested in coming to Canada. Within hours of the call, Leger and Nordiques president Marcel Aubu were on a plane for Austria. Marian was with the brothers, but he wasn't ready to leave. On top of being a hockey star, he was also a successful lawyer and the most fluent of the brothers in English. The 5 men engaged in an impromptu contract negotiation. Considering the cost of what they were about to do, Peter and Anton didn't come cheap. Marian looked over the agreement and approved it. It would cost the Nordiques nearly $500,000 a year, but when the meeting was over, they had 2 Stastnys on the books. Aubu told Marian that he was more than welcome to join his brothers, but he refused. If it were at all possible, he would wait for official approval to join the club. The mechanics of the plan were elaborate. As the Czechoslovak team boarded the team bus to leave Innsbruck, Anton, Peter, and Darina would walk past it and into 2 idling vehicles. The brothers would be driven to Vienna in a red Mercedes by Aubu and Leger. Darina would go with the mysterious Mr. 007. Once in Vienna, the Stastnys were filed away in a room at a Holiday Inn under Aubu's name, while Aubu and Leger worked out a plan for safe passage at the Canadian Embassy. Czechoslovak secret police spotted the Nordique officials on the way and attempted to intercept them, but they slipped through to the embassy. After arrangements were made, things got messy. Canadian officials evaded Czech police like it was choreographed by William Friedkin. They tore down sidewalks to avoid gridlock and drove the wrong way down one-way streets, rifle-toting communist officials at their heels all the time. When they arrived at the airport, Austrian police escorted the quintet to a plane bound for Montreal. When the plane arrived on August 25, 1980, the quintet was greeted with questions from a waiting mob of reporters. Aubu said, "Had I known the dangers, I never would have done it." He wiped his brow and continued, "Had I known that I'd be risking my life and the lives of others, I never would have done it." When Marian arrived back home, it was to a barrage of questions, but not from the press. He was interrogated by police. That first season was legendary. Peter destroyed Brian Trottier's rookie record with 39 goals and 109 points. His 70 assists are still the rookie high standard. Only Teemu Selanne has ever scored more points as a rookie. The brothers would sometimes exasperate Nordique's coach Michel Bergeron. Peter would enter the zone uncontested and would stop up and not even look at the net. It's as if he was saying, "Where's my brother?" Then he'd dish it to Anton. Sometimes Anton would score, sometimes he wouldn't. But Anton proved to be no slouch, with 39 goals of his own and 85 points. The two performed in lockstep. Each one knew where the other would be. Behind the back passes, tap-in goals. In back-to-back games at Vancouver and Washington, both brothers had hat tricks. Quebec improved by 17 points in the standings and made the NHL playoffs for the first time. Back home, however, the atmosphere was far less celebratory. Brother Marian had been suspended for the year by the Czech Hockey Federation. No explanation was given, none was needed. To add insult to injury, he was disbarred from continuing his legal practice. The Stastny's patriarch, Stanislav, meanwhile, had it just as bad. Overnight, he'd lost his inventory management job with the state-run company he worked at. The remaining family members were subjected to intense surveillance and interrogation. At one point early on, Marian received a phone call from the police asking if he desired to leave the country. He replied that, yes, of course he'd like to join his brothers in Canada, but he maintained that he intended to leave lawfully and with state approval. The voice on the other end told him he would be permitted to leave in a month or two. A month or two passed with no follow-up. Lifelong friends snubbed him. In desperation, Marian reached out to President Gustav Husak himself but received no reply. That was the final straw. He decided to make contact with the Nordiques. The club got the message and sent him cash via back channels. He started formulating a plan of his own. He would travel to Yugoslavia through Hungary, then break away via Austria and wing it from there. Knowing he was being tailed by Czech police, he decided to try a few dry runs to see how far he could get. He requested a day pass to Hungary for a picnic and a swim by the lake, and to his shock, he was granted it. Then he tried it again and again. No problem. Meanwhile, he was forced to publicly denounce his brothers. News filtered in that Peter had won the Calder Trophy as the NHL's top rookie. The promise of real success awaited him overseas. The next day trip would be the real deal. After obtaining another legal day pass, Marian loaded up his wife and 3 children into the family car and headed for Hungary. But this time, they would not be stopping by the lake. Marian drove straight through Hungary to the border of Yugoslavia. There, they were sure to face an intense interrogation. Much of the money the Nordiques had sent was used to obtain illegal papers. The children hadn't been informed of the plan. At the border, the customs agent eyed the papers with seemingly intense scrutiny. The children started asking naive questions from the back seat. Where are we going? Why are we going to Yugoslavia? Marian's wife Eva did what she could to cover. Marian tightened his grip on the steering wheel. When the agent stamped his approval across the papers, it must have been a tremendous relief. But the Stastnys weren't in the clear just yet. After spending the night in Zagreb, Marian went to the Austrian consulate and applied for a 14-day visa to Vienna. He was refused. They were allowed a 3-day visa instead. That meant the clock was ticking. An overstay would alert authorities and the plan would be nixed. Marian and his family would be watched all the closer, and an opportunity this good would probably never present itself again. Obu and Leger had been monitoring the situation. They sensed a real danger that the Austrian authorities would turn in the Stastnys to the Czechoslovak government. They sent an urgent appeal to Canadian immigration officials to allow the Stastnys to enter Canada. When they were approved, Obu and Leger boarded a plane to Vienna immediately and escorted the family to their new adopted homeland. On the ice, and safely in the blue sweater with the fleur-de-lis patches, Marian was just as good as his younger brothers. The year off had dulled his instincts slightly, and he, like his brothers before him, had to adjust to the extensive travel and lengthy schedule, But his first year in Quebec City, he scored 35 goals and 89 points. The trio played together as a unit, in lockstep. The Stastnys made the Nordiques into contenders. The club improved in the standings again, this time by only 4 points. However, they came alive during the playoffs, dispatching their rival Habs in the first round and the Bruins in the second to make it all the way to the Wales Conference Finals. They would lose to the Islanders in that matchup. Peter would eventually wind up in hockey's Hall of Fame and famously finish second in scoring throughout the decade of the 80s to Wayne Gretzky. But more important than that, the Stastnys took to Quebec's provincial capital as a European-like city. By December 1981, Marion had opened a discotheque/bar/restaurant in the swanky part of town. The Stastnys risked it all to arrive, and when they did, they proved very quickly that they belonged, proving that talent such as theirs belongs to the world. Disclaimer: the facts of this case are in doubt. Witnesses cannot be trusted, and evidence is circumstantial at best. Make sure you listen to the end of this one to draw your own conclusions. Was it luck or genius? Over the decades, rumor morphed into legend, and outsiders never came to a satisfactory conclusion on the matter. The story goes like this. As a freshman junior, Quebec Remparts center Guy Lafleur was putting up ridiculous numbers. 8 hat tricks before the end of November. By early December, he'd scored 50 in 25 games. By mid-January, he'd broken the single-season Quebec Junior A mark of 75 set by Michel Briere. 103 goals by season's end. In the playoffs, he added another 25 and 43 points in 15 games, leading the Remparts to the inaugural President's Cup as newly formed QMJHL champions. The year before, the Quebec City Junior Aces had finished dead last in the old QJAHL. The craziest part was Lafleur still wouldn't be draft eligible for another year. Here's where the legend forms like a deep ocean pearl. Montreal Canadiens GM Sam Pollock had been around some of the greatest hockey players to ever play the game, but he'd never seen such a torrid scoring pace, and he wasn't about to let it just pass him by. The Habs had won 4 of the last 5 Stanley Cups. They missed the playoffs in 1970, but they were still a great team. He had no intention of tanking, if it were even possible, but he just had to get this kid on his team. He had 1 year to do it. So he looked at the standings, and he looked at the rosters of the bottom teams, and he made a bet. Then, he moved heaven and earth to make sure it paid off. The bet was that the California Golden Seals would finish the following season in last place, and therefore own the rights to pick first in the following draft. The same draft that featured Guy Lafleur as the top prospect. Pollock called Frank Selke Jr., the Seals GM, and made him an offer he just couldn't refuse. It was May 1970. The amateur draft was right around the corner. The Seals had made the playoffs in 1970. For more on that story, see our Michel Briere and Ted Hampson segments. With a new team owner and snazzy new unis, the Seals considered themselves a club on the rise. They coveted junior star Chris Odleifson, but didn't have a first-round pick to get him. It turned out they had traded away their first-round pick that year to Pollock and the Canadiens. By 1968, the Seals had already traded their first picks in 1968, 70, and 72 to Montreal in various deals. The Seals were eager to trade back up into the first round to land their man. So, Selke went back to his favorite trading partner in Sam Pollock to see if something could be done. The Habs graciously agreed to send their 10th overall pick to Oakland in exchange for Oakland's first rounder in the next year's draft. They even agreed to send over prospect Ernie Hick to reunite him with his older brother Bill, who already played for the Seals. Ernie Hick was more than just a throw-in. Though a spare part in Montreal, he was a genuine roster upgrade in Oakland. He'd had a decent run over 2 seasons in the Central and Western Pro Leagues, scoring 29 goals each year and finishing on a high in Salt Lake City with a 9-game goal streak near the end of the season. The Seals also agreed to send Francois Lacombe to Montreal so that they could expose him in the expansion draft. It was a done deal. Everybody was happy. The Seals got their man in the draft, plus another warm body to help them climb the standings the following season. The results, however, were discouraging. The Seals didn't win until game number 10, but there were signs. They might not be a playoff team in 1971, but by Christmas 1970, they were on a 4-game heater, and out of the West Division basement. Rookie Ernie Hook started coming alive too around that time, notching 6 goals and 13 points in just 7 games. Watching from on high, it was all falling apart for Sam Pollock. The Seals, bolstered by the rookie he had sent to them, were digging themselves out of last place and therefore would not secure the top pick in the draft. A month later, he did something about it. The Kings suffered through a 4-18-8 stretch and threatened to knock the Seals off their perch as the league's #1 losers. Pollock would now probably have to somehow acquire the Kings' first-round pick to guarantee that they'd pick first. The problem for Pollock was that the Kings had already traded their first-rounder in 1971 to Boston for veteran help. There was no way Harry Sinden would trade LA's first pick to Montreal for anything less than a fleecing, so he would have to come up with a creative solution. Reliable veteran center Ralph Backstrom had been an early season holdout. When he finally re-signed with Montreal, he returned to the lineup in a very limited role. When he wasn't healthy scratched, he was picking up a mere 5 points in 16 games. He was still a good player, but Montreal was too deep for him to continue in a big role there. So Pollock helped Backstrom, the Kings, and himself by sending Backstrom to LA for a token package. Backstrom instantly improved the Kings and enjoyed a career resurgence in an expanded role with the club, scoring 14 goals and 27 points in the final 33 LA games. The Kings rose in the standings while the Seals cooled off. By the end of it, the Seals were the worst team in the league by 10 points. Meanwhile, Lafleur led the Remparts to a Memorial Cup title after scoring 130 goals and 209 points in 62 games. Only days earlier, the Canadiens had won the Stanley Cup once again, the 5th time in 7 years. The title was the 10th in the career of Habs' 39-year-old captain Jean Beliveau. A little over 2 weeks later, Beliveau announced his retirement. The hockey world had converged on Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal for the annual draft meeting. Belivau's news conference was an emotional one, but there was also an air of excitement. The next day, the Habs introduced their new coach, Scotty Bowman, as the draft got underway. The Habs were on the clock first, but they had already identified their man. When they announced the pick, Lafleur was nowhere to be found. Even back then, junior players would attend the draft and get started on their professional journey right away. As Detroit announced their selection at number 2 overall, Marcel Dion, Lafleur was rushing down a hotel corridor with baggage and parents in tow. "I'm sorry I missed it," Lafleur said breathlessly, "but I feel a great relief now. All I've heard the last few weeks is how I'm going to be drafted first and all that. I think it's easier playing hockey." Right away, the Habs expected big things from their hard-won number 1 selection. "Lafleur is a smart player," Chief Scout Claude Ruel said. "He carries the puck, he's tough, and he backchecks too. He never lets his team down, and that's the mark of a star." Expectations were high on both ends. When asked about his first pro contract, Lafleur said, "How much do you think I'm worth? How much do you think I'll get? I'll tell you, it won't be for less than what I was making with the Remparts." Lafleur signed a 2-year pact worth $105,000, $25,000 per season, with a $55,000 signing bonus. The club offered him jersey number 4 for continuity's sake, but he refused, opting for number 10 instead. In his first 3 seasons in Montreal, Lafleur performed well, scoring 64, 55, and 56 points, but he hadn't taken off the way he was expected to. Going from 130 goals to 29 from one season to the next must have felt like whiplash. Some rumbled that the Habs had made the wrong pick. Over in Detroit, Dion was doing a brisk business on offense, putting together seasons of 77, 90, and 78 points. The following season, however, Lafleur would ditch the helmet he'd been wearing, unleash his golden flow, and seemingly symbolically, his offensive gifts along with it. Both Dion, the Little Beaver, and Lafleur, the Blonde Demon, exploded for 100 points that year and went on to enjoy Hall of Fame careers. But what if the Seals had kept the pick? What happens if Lafleur plays in Northern California? Would he have enjoyed a 100-point explosion? The Seals had a knack for rushing young players and harming their development, then trading them away before things turned around. It could go one of two ways. Either the team drags him down so that he never enjoys the kind of breakout he would in Montreal and eventually be traded, most likely ending up in Montreal anyway for spare parts. Or he drags the team up with him. He injects excitement into the city, his creativity is unleashed even earlier, and the Seals start selling tickets. The Seals survive. They never move. Suddenly everything changes. There's no Sharks, and probably no Minnesota North Stars by the end of the 1970s either. It becomes a fever dream. It's impossible to say what might have been, but if I had to guess based on precedent, I'd say that the Seals would probably have found a way to mess up Lafleur's development. And though he still winds up a Cup champion and Hall of Famer with Montreal, it's possible that his explosion is delayed by a year or two. Anyway, it's fun to speculate. When the Seals and the 5 other new expansion teams were brought into the NHL in 1967, Pollock proposed a rule that would prevent the new teams from trading away their first-round draft picks. The other 5 original 6 clubs rejected the proposal. By trading away reserve players, Pollock ended up stockpiling 17 first-round picks between 1969 and 1974, restocking an aging dynasty and ushering in a new one, as if by fiat. The Lafleur pick trade was his masterpiece. An argument can be made that it, and the orchestration surrounding it, was the greatest move a GM ever made. But was the story even true? That's the legend version of the story. Pollock himself told a different version. In his words, in 1969-1970, the Seals finished 4th in their division after a strong second-place finish the previous season. They definitely were a team on their way to good things, and many thought they could win the West Division. There's no way I could have predicted that the Seals would be last in the NHL, and we would have their draft pick number 1 overall. Sometimes in hockey, it's better to be lucky than good. As far as the rumor that Pollock sent Backstrom to LA to bolster their place in the standings and ensure the Montreal would get the first pick, Pollock said, "Fiction, pure fiction, and stronger words if you want them. Ralph will verify this. For personal reasons, Ralph wanted to move to a team on the West Coast and we talked about it. The Kings were the only team to make an offer for him." Strong language, but there's a possibility that he was just being humble or diplomatic. The truth was Backstrom didn't dramatically improve the Kings overnight, as the legend states. In the 45 games before the trade, the Kings nursed a .400 winning percentage. Their winning percentage increased to .409 in the 33 games after the trade. If Pollock was attempting to orchestrate movement in the standings, he did a fairly poor job of it. Unless, of course, he just needed the Kings to tread water, while the Seals forgot how to swim. And Pollock didn't win every bet. Many of those 17 first-rounders turned into washouts. Sometimes when a shrewd manager with a keen hockey mind meets the mythmakers and storytellers, he stops being a man and becomes an evil genius. Sometimes we craft stories and legends because we want to believe them, because we hate the thought that some are just lucky and others aren't. It seems unfair. Sometimes that's just the way she goes. In 1982, the Washington Capitals weren't just losing money. They were about to disappear. The league had already discussed shutting them down. Ownership was ready to walk away. The only thing that kept them alive was a last-minute push from their own fans. And then, a few weeks later, a trade was made. Not for a superstar, not for a goal scorer, but for a stay-at-home defenseman who completely remade the team and showed them how to win. By 1982, the Washington Capitals had lost about $20 million. Things were so bad that the club didn't offer season tickets for the coming 1982-83 season. At the annual NHL Board of Governors meeting in June of 1982, owner Abe Poland and his legal counsel sought to suspend operations altogether. When reports came out, a grassroots support swelled up. An organized effort called Save Our Caps stepped in. The organization's efforts managed to pledge Poland's minimum requirements for season ticket numbers and helped guarantee that the first 8 home games of the season would be sellouts. Poland relented. Save Our Caps increased the Capitals' visibility in the community and renewed interest in the on-ice product. When interim GM Roger Crozier was let go by the club in favor of 33-year-old David Poile, Crozier claimed it was because he wasn't a yes man to ownership. The pressure was on Poile to please ownership and reward the fans who rescued the team from extinction, and to get the Caps into the playoffs. After 8 years of existence, they'd never qualified. They were woeful defensively and didn't play as a unit. Top-line center Dennis Marouk set franchise records with 60 goals and 136 points, but was considered a floater, a guy who would circle around the blue line and wait for the breakout pass. At best, it was empty-calorie offense. Ryan Walter was the club's best all-around player, their captain and hardest worker. But one player doesn't reset the culture, at least not usually. The Caps had lost $3 million the previous season alone. Poile did what he could to stop the bleeding. He trimmed veterans off the payroll. Acrobatic but injury-prone goalie Mike Palmateer was traded away. And underperforming forwards Jean Pronovost, Bob Kelly, and Oris Kindrachuk were all released. Montreal Canadiens GM Irving Grundman called Poile on his second day on the job to congratulate him. The two of them got around to talking shop. Poile explained that Ryan Walter was a contract holdout. Habs defenseman Rod Langway was too. Langway and Brian Engblom formed what was widely considered the best defensive tandem in the league. The pair had each finished in the top 5 in plus-minus each of the past 2 seasons. Langway had a great attitude, but a tax situation put his career at an impasse in Montreal. Changing laws made it so that Americans working in Quebec had to pay considerably higher taxes. Because of the new law, Langway was taking home only $40,000 of a $150,000 deal. He requested a new contract or a trade out of town. Players in the U.S. with contracts half Langway's size were taking home more than him after taxes. Langway decided to stay with the Habs through training camp, but would walk out on the team before the regular season started. The next time Poile and Grundman spoke, at a league meeting in Toronto, a deal was made to swap dissatisfied players. For years, the Habs lacked grit. Grundman wanted Walter. Poile wanted a top defenseman in return. The deal ended up being lopsided. On September 9, 1982, Grundman agreed to send both Langway and Engblom to Washington along with forwards Doug Jarvis and Craig Laughlin for Walter and defenseman Rick Green. The Montreal media immediately hated the trade. They despised Grundman. To them, this trade was further validation of an already curdled opinion. They were still bitter that he had selected Doug Wickenheiser with the first overall pick over Denny Savard, an opinion the numbers quickly validated. They lambasted him for giving aging veterans Larry Robinson and Guy Lafleur $100,000 raises while trading away Langway and Engblom. Rick Green was considered to be just an average defender, and a significant downgrade from both Langway or Engblom. Jarvis and Laughlin were seen as underrated players who improved team defense. In an appearance on a Montreal radio station, Langway said he was ecstatic to join Washington, and that Grundman had made the worst trade in the history of the NHL. Then he set out to prove it. In Washington, Langway was named team captain. By early November, the Capitals were showing typical signs, sporting a 3-7-2 record, tied with Hartford for dead last in the NHL. The club still hadn't won a home game despite the string of sellouts. A game against the Blues on November 5th set something off. In the words of Blues coach Emile Francis, it was a very heavy, very tough game. In the first, a Bernie Federko shot rattled along the goal line. The replay showed that it was swept out of harm's way by Engblom, but both the referee and goal judge counted it. In the third, with under 2 minutes to go in the game, a goal-mouth scramble seemed to end in a Mike Gartner goal, but it wasn't counted. The game ended in a heartbreaking 1-goal loss. 2 nights later, the Caps hosted the Whalers. Frustrations boiled over. Gartner scored 12 seconds into the game. A line brawl started with a fracas between Capital Randy Holt and Whaler Archie Henderson just 4 minutes in. Langway was ejected for sucker-punching Ray Neufeld during the melee. But the Caps were fired up and won the game 6-2. It was the first in a 6-game undefeated streak. It was the first of 3 such streaks the club would enjoy, including one that lasted 14 games without a loss. Langway stabilized the defense, allowing the offensive weapons to operate. Coach Brian Murray played him 32 minutes a night until he took him off the power play unit. Langway would never miss an optional skate, despite the heavy workload. I suggested he take it easy in practice, but he told me that wasn't a good thing to do, Murray said. Then I told him to take a day off. He was the first one out there. His work habits and character on the ice set a tremendous example. Off the ice, he's a very, very good captain. Under Langway's watch, the team culture shifted. Everybody thought about defense first. Offense became a byproduct of good defending. Even Marouk bought in, accepting an assignment at left wing and seeing his numbers dip. It didn't matter, because for once in his career, his team was winning. Langway introduced accountability. He wasn't afraid to take a teammate aside and tell him what he did wrong. When coaches wanted to work on something with a player, they found that usually Langway had gotten to him first. This might not sound right, Poyle said, but I think if there ever was any trouble in the locker room, Rod would throttle the guy causing it. Murray said, "Last year it seemed everybody waited for me to do the yelling and screaming in the room. Rod's taking charge in there, and it's gotten contagious. He even has Mike Gartner and Dennis Marouk going, and they always just sat there quiet." The result was the Capitals' first winning season, shattering many club records along the way. For the first time in 9 years of existence, they had made the playoffs. The Caps lost to the champs, the New York Islanders, 3-1, winning Game 2 on Long Island. Workaholic Langway helped create a tradition from scratch. Regardless of the playoff result, they knew they could play. The team never looked back. They would return to the playoffs each of the next 13 seasons, including every year Langway was a member of the team. He retired after the 1993 season and was selected for the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2002. Home game attendance remained high, and the Capitals never again faced a credible threat of relocation. Abe Poland sold the team to Ted Leonsis in 1999 for $85 million. In some markets, the difference between a team being in the red and the black comes down to personnel, both on the ice and the front office. Sometimes personnel decisions create a domino effect that makes or breaks a franchise. Timing and talent assessment came together to rescue the Capitals from oblivion. On a final note, and to do a sliver of justice to Grunman, both Walter and Green helped Montreal win the Stanley Cup in 1986. In 1970, 2 expansion teams entered the NHL. Both were handed a franchise player. One would become the face of a team for nearly 2 decades. The other would spend his career trying to figure out where he belonged. The difference between them came down to the spin of a wheel. At least, that's the official version. In 1970, the NHL held its second expansion when it welcomed new teams in Vancouver and Buffalo. For the second straight season, NHL powerhouses Montreal and Boston held the top picks of the league's 4 worst teams thanks to shrewd trading. The top 2 picks in the amateur draft were reserved for the newcomers, but thanks to Montreal and Boston, they came with a stipulation. The NHL's Board of Governors put rules in place to ensure that the expansion clubs couldn't trade their first picks, and the players chosen had to remain with the club for at least 3 seasons. A spinning wheel was used to determine who would pick first. Vancouver had numbers 2 to 6, Buffalo had 8 to 12. 7 would result in a respin. When the wheel landed on number 11, NHL President Clarence Campbell thought it landed on 1 and announced that Vancouver had the pick. Cheers erupted from the Canucks table, fist pumps and high fives all around. But there was no number 1. Buffalo's head coach and GM Punch Imlich piped up and corrected Campbell, who was embarrassed by the mistake. What makes this scenario odd, or even suspicious, are the coincidences involving numbers. Some of them are small, some of them were really large for the time, but we'll get back to this. The top 2 prospects of the draft were blue chippers, considered franchise cornerstones. Center Gilbert Perreault of the Montreal Junior Canadiens had scored at a torrid pace in the OHA and led the club to back-to-back Memorial Cup titles. He had NHL-ready size, and his speed and creativity made him a superstar in the making. The other was Dale Tallon of the Toronto Marlies. Listed as a defenseman, he scored 39 goals and 79 points in 54 games, playing every position but goaltender. Tallon was the first blue-chip defender slapped with the label of the next Bobby Orr, and he wouldn't be the last. In that era, just about any young defender who could move the puck was given the label. Once the pick was in, Imlich chose Perreault. People wondered how Perreault would work with Imlich, who had a reputation of not coddling star players and favoring veterans. Imlich took Perreault aside and told him not to worry about playing defense, just focus on scoring. He quickly signed the junior star to a 3-year, $75,000 deal. As a junior, the Montreal crowds would chant, "We want Perreault." When asked if he would consider trading the young center to the Habs, Imlich mused, "All Sam Pollock's got to do is give me Jean Beliveau, Jacques Lemaire, Henri Richard, Jacques Laperriere, J.C. Tremblay, and a few more of them." Imlich predicted that the Sabres would make the playoffs in their first year, passing Vancouver and Toronto. He also said the Sabres would be the first expansion team to win the Stanley Cup. After he was fired by the Maple Leafs following the 1969 season, he never missed a chance to shade his former team. When Imlich chose the color scheme for the Sabres unis, he reasoned that the Leafs were blue and white, but the Sabres would be blue and gold, because they would be classier. In Vancouver, Tallon was becoming the Canucks' Mr. Everything. But Tallon just wanted to be something specific. That first season was his most productive on the West Coast. He scored 14 goals and 56 points, breaking Bobby Orr's record for rookie defenseman, though that was a bit of a misnomer. Once again, the organization shuffled him around the lineup, trying him at every position but goaltender. Being an expansion club, the Canucks were thin down the middle. The organization hoped that Tallon would develop into the 6'1", 195-pound center they really wanted. It begs the question why they didn't just take Daryl Sittler with the pick. Tallon was unhappy. When asked, Tallon would say, "I'm not playing my position." Perreault played his natural position with a flair and grace patterned after Jean Beliveau. Imlich had coached Beliveau with the Quebec Aces and claimed that Perreault was the better player. Perreault set league records, breaking Newsy Lalonde's rookie goals record that had stood since 1925. His 72 points shattered the old mark, and he did it with Eddie Shack and Ron Anderson as his wings. That same season, Phil Esposito set new standards with 76 goals and 152 points. He said if anyone was going to break those records, it would be Perreault. Perreault won the Calder Trophy. He joined Team Canada for the 1972 Summit Series, but flew home from Moscow to attend Sabres training camp after it was revealed he wouldn't play with the team. By year 3, Imlich had quit the bench due to health reasons, but the Sabres finally lived up to his promise by making the playoffs. Perreault hit another level with 88 points, centering the French connection line with Rick Martin and René Robert. The trio made deft passes, sharing a seemingly telepathic ability to find each other through traffic. Watching Perreault, his effortless ability to skate through entire teams and deke out netminders, one had to wonder how he didn't score 10 times a game. Perreault had outscored every NHL player who came before him after 3 seasons. In 1973, he won the Lady Byng Trophy with 10 penalty minutes. He finished 5th place in Hart Trophy voting. The sky was the limit. After 3 years in Vancouver, Talon's confidence was shattered. He never knew where he'd be slotted into the lineup, sometimes not until just before puck drop. The team was a disaster on the ice and off the ice. They'd managed just 66 wins and were hit harder than most by WHA roster poaching. Tom Scallon, the club's owner, was convicted of securities fraud in April of 1973. Talon had seen his point totals plummet from 56 to 44 to 37 in increasingly confusing deployment. The good news for Talon was the 3-year prospect trade embargo had been lifted. Talon was determined to never play for the Canucks again. If the team didn't trade him, he would sign with the WHA. Canucks management relented and traded Talon to the Chicago Blackhawks for goaltender Gary Smith and defenseman Jerry King Kong Korab. The Hawks introduced their new star defender to the Chicago media with a press conference where they handed him a jersey with the number 9 on it. Talon was confused. That was Bobby Hull's number. This was the Blackhawks' way of sticking it to Hull for bolting for the WHA and more money. After a couple of preseason games and a steady shower of boos every time he touched the puck, Talon demanded they give him a new number. They gave him 19. In his 3rd season with the Hawks, and his first fully healthy one, Talon set new franchise record for points by a defenseman with 62. He'd never hit 30 again, and retired 4 years later. Perreault retired after the 1986 season. He changed his mind and returned for the 1986-87 season, but changed his mind again after only 20 games. He scored 9 goals and 16 points in those 20 games, but his passion was gone. He thought he'd lost his legs and was no longer able to work the same magic he once had. Over 17 seasons, he amassed over 500 goals and 1,300 points, all with the Sabres. He became a first-ballot Hall of Famer in 1990, but one thing eluded him. When Sabres owner Seymour Knox passed away in 1996, he did so having never seen his team win the Stanley Cup. Perreault represented his team's best hope in those years, but even Scotty Bowman and a renewed dedication to defense couldn't change their fortunes. Knox had originally bought the Oakland Seals back in 1969 with the intention of moving them to Buffalo. The NHL wouldn't allow it. The Seals' original owner, Barry Van Gerbig, still hadn't paid the league the full amount of the $2 million expansion fee. By 1970, just 3 years after Oakland's entry, the expansion fee had gone up to $6 million, and the league wanted Knox to pay it. Here's where the whispers begin. Some argued that the league knew that it was screwing Knox for more money, and therefore owed him a favor. Enter Clarence Campbell's spinning wheel. Imlich is the one who chose high numbers for Buffalo. He said it was because 11 was his favorite number. 11 also just happened to be Perreault's jersey number in the juniors. The wheel landed on number 11, giving the Sabres the chance to draft first overall and select Perreault, setting up the team for success. Perreault later claimed that he chose jersey number 11 in Buffalo because of the spinning wheel. Then what made him choose number 11 in juniors? The official version says that the pick was chosen on a whim, the spin of a wheel, but it's entirely possible that the official version is a smokescreen, that corruption and backroom dealing decided the fate of 2 franchises from the beginning, and has cursed each one of them ever since. When the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in 1961, the finale was a little anticlimactic. Bobby Hull scored 2 in the first period of Game 1 and put a cork in it. There was no dramatic finish, no iconic goal. Just a struggle until the final 4 periods when Chicago broke the series wide open. But by the end of it, Bobby Hull's name was engraved on the cup. His son Brett was born 3 years later. People would say ignorant things. That chubby kid is Bobby Hull's son? The elder Hull created an impossible standard for any son to live up to, let alone a hockey-playing one. And yet, Brett made his NHL debut in the Stanley Cup Final with the Calgary Flames 25 years after his father had won his title. The Flames lost. Brett then got traded, had a legendary decade in St. Louis, scored at final boss levels in the regular season, but never made it past the second round of the playoffs. In all those years, Brett had never even seen the cup, never got the chance to work his fingers over the engraving of his father's name. He never even got close. In 1998, the Dallas Stars were close. They'd made it to the conference finals, but being shut out in the opening and closing games of the series suggested the team needed more scoring. That summer, Hull became an unrestricted free agent, one of the most intriguing of all time. In St. Louis, he had developed a reputation for being too outspoken. He was labeled a locker room cancer. As the best Blues player, he was seen as the problem. Some, like former Blues coach Mike Keenan, even said that no team could win with Brett Hull. Dallas took a swing anyway, signing him to a 3-year, $17.5 million deal. Some questioned the fit. Dallas played a rigid defensive structure. Many observers believed that star player Mike Modano would be a perennial 100-point man in a more open system. Some outside observers were skeptical they'd be able to change Brett Hull. Stars coach Ken Hitchcock didn't even try to. Hull wasn't asked to play defense or become a grinder, only to make the right play when the Stars lost the puck. That season, Hull just tried to blend in, be one of the guys, and focus on team chemistry. In the playoffs, the Stars made it past the Blues in the second round. He was seeing things from the other side for the first time. By Father's Day, they were still playing, and playing, and playing. They were locked in mortal combat with the Sabres in the Stanley Cup Final. The Stars were ahead in the series 3-2. Game 6 was held at Marine Midland Arena in Buffalo. Last game of the season for the home crowd. The Cup was in the building. Hull had missed Game 4 of the series with a groin pull and wore a brace on his knee. The Stars lost that game 2-1. They missed his offense, and even if he didn't factor into the scoring, they missed the threat to score that his presence represented. Hitchcock limited his deployment. If it were the regular season, he wouldn't be playing at all. The Sabres had been shut out in Game 5. For a time, it looked like the Sabres would never score again. But dependable center Stu Barnes finally broke Buffalo's drought with under 2 to play in the second. Tie game, 1-1. The third period settled nothing. The first overtime settled nothing. The second overtime settled nothing. Outdoor watch parties in Texas were thinning out. It was well past midnight. The players dragged. The neutral zone was a wrestling match, neither team willing to give an inch or chance a mistake. When called upon, the Stars' Ed Belfour and Sabres' Dominic Hasek were equal to the challenge. Sabres veteran defender James Patrick came close a couple of times, but couldn't solve both the goalie and the post. Hull was stopped on a breakaway. Two of the best goalies to ever play the game were going save for save, and it looked like no one would ever beat them. After 54 minutes of overtime, it was the second longest game in Stanley Cup Final history. Then, finally, something happened. Something that's still hotly debated to this day. Modano was worked over along the boards by Alexei Zhitnik, but came away with possession. Modano threw the puck towards the face-off circle where it was won by Yuri Lettinen, who just threw it on net. Hull redirected the puck into Hasek's waiting paddle. The shot bounced off Hasek's stick and he fell forward to smother it. Hull scraped it away with his stick while fighting Brian Holzinger for position. Hull then kicked the puck to his stick and swept it past both Hasek's cashing glove and leg as he sprawled into the Buffalo net. The epic struggle was finally over. Hull threw up both hands and skated into the corner where he was mobbed by ecstatic teammates. And then something funny happened. Coach Lindy Ruff and the Sabres just stood there. They didn't concede victory. The replay showed that Hull's skate was in the crease. The Stars were celebrating. Sabres coaching staff were still on the bench trying to talk to the officials. Per league rules, the on-ice officiating staff were not allowed to leave the area in front of the penalty box while video replay officials combed over the footage topside. After the review, the goal stood. The celebration continued. Ruff and the Sabres were furious. Here's where the misunderstanding comes into play. All season long, the standard had been that a goal scored while a player's foot was in the crease was taken off the board. If the player's foot entered the crease before the puck, the goal was called back all season. It was automatic. However, to add confusion, a not much publicized memo had gone around league-wide in March that had revised the unpopular rule. The memo stated that if a player had possession of the puck and the puck entered the crease first, any part of his body could legally enter the crease. If he scored, the goal would count. The official explanation was that when Hull redirected the puck with his stick, he acquired possession of the puck. The Hasek save did not result in a change of possession. Therefore, when the puck bounced off Hasek's stick and out of the goal crease, and Hull's skate stayed inside the blue paint, it was not a violation because it was a continuation of play from the same possession. Hull was allowed to have his foot enter the crease on the play while fighting for the loose puck. He just wasn't allowed to stick his foot in before the puck arrived. Needless to say, the explanation didn't satisfy Lindy Ruff. The bone of contention was about the rule of possession. However, possession had been looked at. The decision had come down from on high. Most missed it because they were watching the chaos of a celebration. Many fans were disturbed by what they saw, and not just Buffalo fans. But by the standard of the official league rules at the time, it was a good goal. To add fuel to everybody's confusion and anger, the rule was scrapped altogether that summer. What about Brett Hull? What was his reaction? The selfish player, the locker room cancer. Honestly, to me, I was so happy for a guy like Mike, Hull said. He sacrificed being possibly one of the greatest offensive players of all time to play within the system that Bob Gainey and Ken Hitchcock wanted. He sacrificed to play in a very conservative system, and he still put up incredible numbers. So for him to get the accomplishment of winning a Stanley Cup and showing that his sacrifice was worth it, that to me was the greatest part of that goal. Somewhere out there in the multiverse, if you subscribe to such a theory, there is a world just like ours, except the Hull goal was waved off. Play continues, but does the outcome ultimately change? The Sabres had managed just one goal in the last 206 minutes of the series. Then again, as the old saying goes, once you're in, anything can happen. To be fair, and this is just one perspective, but Hull said, at the end, we were all banged up. I'm not sure if we could have won Game 7 with all the injured players. The marathon game stretched on so long that when it ended, it wasn't Father's Day anymore. That's why when the Stars celebrate the anniversary of the win, they celebrate it on both the 19th and the 20th. But back in 1999, well past midnight, Brett Hull sat atop a visitor's locker in the Marine Midland Arena, cigar in hand, arm around the Stanley Cup. After a moment, he twirled the legendary mug around, studying each name until he found the one he was looking for. Then he found it. Under Chicago Blackhawks, there it was, etched in silver. Robert Hull. He flashed his biggest smile then. He'd grown up hearing the whispers. That chubby kid is Bobby Hull's son? He didn't have to live up to anybody else's standards anymore. The best thing about it all is telling them all just to shut up, Hull said. I don't have to hear that stuff anymore. The Stanley Cup was in the building for Game 6. After missing the playoffs for 7 years straight, the Calgary Flames suddenly found themselves with the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to win the Stanley Cup on home ice. Flames captain Jerome McGinley said, "We plan on being pretty desperate, being 60 minutes away from all our dreams." Twice, they came back and tied the score. Then, with 7 minutes to go in the third, the puck bounced towards the goal line. Some say it crossed the line. The broadcast crew were convinced. Replays were inconclusive. The puck dropped before the play could be reviewed. Then, the game came down to the very player that the Flames had rejected just 4 years earlier. The series itself was something of a pivotal moment. For some, it was a referendum. The Flames were just the most recent roster built around sandpaper who ground their way to a surprise trip to the finals. The game had been trending in that direction ever since Jacques Lemaire's trap system won a Stanley Cup for New Jersey nearly 10 years earlier. Coaches don't care about entertaining fans, they're paid to win. Lax rule enforcement bolstered the systems. The Tampa Bay Lightning, on the other hand, represented youth, offense, and hope that the game would get exciting again. Their 245 goals over an 82-game schedule was nothing to write home about in the grand scheme, but was good enough for third best in the league that season. Their star players were young, fast, skilled. Their best player had been considered too small for the contemporary game. In college, Martin St. Louis had been a top player, a leader, and a champion. But at 5'9", few NHL teams showed interest. After a successful half-season with the AHL's Cleveland Lumberjacks, he drew the interest of the Calgary Flames. He was deployed with the Flames as a fourth-line energy guy. He showed enough of what the club wanted that GM Al Coates picked up his option for the following season. But when Coates was fired that summer, the Flames got cold feet when it came to St. Louis. They left him exposed in the Columbus, Minnesota expansion draft, and when he wasn't picked, the Flames bought him out. Once again, few clubs showed interest in signing him, so he tried out with the worst team in the league, the Tampa Bay Lightning, feeling they'd give him the best chance for ice time. At the time, there was no light at the end of the tunnel for the Lightning. The team had won just 55 games over the course of the previous 3 seasons. St. Louis started slow, scoring a goal and 2 assists while averaging 10 minutes of ice time in 16 games, and was in and out of the lineup. He was at a professional crossroads. That's when he made the most important and fateful decision of his professional life. He abandoned the systems his NHL coaches had taught him and decided to start trusting his instincts. That's when he came alive. He picked up 17 goals and 37 points in the final 62 games of the season and was never healthy scratched again. By the end of the year, he was playing upwards of 20 minutes a night. In 2003, he found another gear playing on the MVP line with Vinny Lecavalier and Vinny Prospal. The Lightning had represented the dregs of the league in a bad era. Suddenly, they were a playoff team. They'd even won a round. By 2004, Prospal was gone, but St. Louis' production went parabolic as he won the Art Ross Trophy. Lightning coach John Tortorella had challenged his team for being satisfied with the second-round exit. The Stanley Cup final appearance represented their response to that challenge. By Game 6 of the final, the Lightning had won 60 games that season alone. In many ways, St. Louis' career trajectory was a direct rebuke of the clutching and grabbing, obstruction and intimidation-driven strategy that had propelled Calgary to the Stanley Cup final. Because the NHL is a copycat league, for St. Louis and the Lightning to fall to the Flames would be a terrible blow to the speed and skill argument of the game. After Game 5, Lightning third-liner Tim Taylor got a phone call from Ray Bourque. Bourque had been Taylor's teammate with the Boston Bruins for 2 years in the late 90s. 3 years earlier, Bourque had found himself in a similar situation with the Colorado Avalanche. Down 3-2 after 5 in the Stanley Cup final, facing elimination at the hands of the New Jersey Devils, Bourque stood up in front of his teammates before the next game and delivered a speech. He was almost in tears. Lightning fourth-liner Chris Dingman had been part of that Avalanche team. He said everybody felt 5 feet taller after Bourque's speech. "We came back," Bourque told Taylor. "So can you. Use us as your inspiration." Lightning captain Dave Andreychuk was touched. He'd also been a teammate of Bourque's and, like Bourque, had never won a cup ring after a lengthy career. St. Louis was also inspired. The message, carried deep meaning coming from Bourque. But in Game 6, St. Louis was struggling. His regular line mate Lecavalier hadn't been himself since taking a hard blow to the head earlier in the series. St. Louis had carried much of the load and couldn't drag it as far as he'd have wanted to. Lightning coach John Tortorella double-shifted him. Before the end of the first period, he had to take oxygen on the bench. He'd only managed 1 goal in his last 3 games, and that while playing with the fourth line. In the second period, he picked up an assist on Brad Richards' opening goal on the power play. Calgary answered, and Tampa retook the lead. Then Calgary answered again. ABC considered switching the broadcast over to ESPN for breaking coverage of the death of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, but decided not to. They wouldn't have considered switching coverage from the Super Bowl. Such was the state of the NHL product. In the third period, things were tense inside the Saddledome. The crowd anticipated a huge go-ahead goal. The Sea of Red was ready to explode in celebration. In the dying moments of a Calgary power play with about 7 minutes to go in the third, speedy Flames winger Oleg Saprykin, who'd scored the overtime winner in Game 5, made a hard break around Taylor toward the Tampa Bay net. Saprykin tried a shot from an awkward angle. Lightning goalie Nikolai Habibulin made the save, but the rebound jumped out front and hit Flames winger Marty Gelinas on the skate. The puck bounced off Gelinas' foot toward the open net, and Habibulin made a desperation kick save. And this is the point of contention. Nobody on the ice signaled for a goal. Not the referee, not the player, and not the goal judge. Play continued normally until it was whistled down half a minute later on an offside. During the broadcast, after the whistle, the replay showed that the puck might have actually crossed the goal line. One angle looked certain. Others were inconclusive. The American broadcast crew definitely thought the puck was in. "Oh my gracious," John Davidson said. "That puck is in," Bill Clement exclaimed. But none of it mattered, because the officials dropped the puck to continue play about 40 seconds later, without ever having looked at the replay. There are a couple things to consider. Each of the Flames' previous 3 playoff rounds had concluded with a Gelinas play. In Calgary, they called him the Eliminator. On replay, it looked like he'd done it again. The home audience saw a white gap between the puck and the goal line. The puck was in midair and on edge, 2 variables that lent doubt to either case. Ultimately, no camera angle proved anything one way or the other. After looking at the replay, Flames coach Daryl Sutter said to himself, "No, you can't say it's a goal." That said, it was not a sudden death scenario anyway. There would still have been 7 minutes left in the game. On the surface, to fans at home, it looked as though some cosmic force had put the series-clinching goal once again in the hands, or feet, of Martin Gelinas, and some other force had intervened. Upstairs, officials never reviewed the play. NHL Director of Hockey Ops Colin Campbell said the play was reviewed post facto and was found inconclusive. During the ABC broadcast of Game 7, a computer animation tried to show that the puck hadn't crossed the goal line while in midair. It wasn't convincing. Despite the one camera angle, it's highly doubtful that a goal would have been awarded upon review. The call on the ice was no goal, and video evidence was insufficient to overturn it. Still, one can't help but wonder what might have happened if Gelinas had just raised his hand to signal a goal. The remainder of regulation settled nothing, nor did the first overtime. Outside the building, it was getting to be nighttime. The Red Mile, gathered along 17th Avenue Southwest, agonized for a satisfying conclusion. No one had gone home. The city of Calgary was 1 goal away from the greatest party it had ever seen. One quick bounce would end the series in favor of the home team. One screen, one deflection, just one more chance. On the first shift of the second overtime, something happened to unsettle matters. Flames enforcer Chris Simon tripped over towering Lightning defender Jason Cullimore and lost the puck. The puck dribbled over to Taylor near the blue line. Taylor put the puck on net, The puck rebounded off Flames goalie Mika Kiprasov right to St. Louis in front. "I was just trying to put it on net," he said. For 80 minutes and 30 seconds, St. Louis hadn't had a shot on goal. "I was waiting to see if the rebound would come," he said. "It wasn't a good angle to shoot, but I just thought to throw it on net. You never know." He lifted the puck up and over Kiprasov to end the game. The Red Mile collapsed and dissipated quietly, at first. Then, something even more amazing started to happen. Slowly at first, but growing in waves. After a couple moments, the Flames faithful put on a display of jubilance. A joyful noise of horn blowing and grateful cheers filled the streets of Calgary on that night. After all, there was still one game left to play.